We continue now at the top of Daf Chafayim and Aleph and Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 25a. The Gemara here continues, Ve'lamai gedola chazaka. So what does it mean when Rabbi Yossi said in the previous Amud that the chazaka of these Kohanim is great? It was talking again about the Kohanim who were in the exile, and so we said that the chazaka that they have in terms of eating truma, they're allowed to continue to eat truma, but nothing more than that. So what's so great about that chazaka? All it means, according to what the Gemara just said, is that they're continuing with the same chazaka. There's nothing being added. As Rashi over here says, Ve'lamai gedola chazaka, to come Rabbi Yossi, which Rabbi Yossi said, Lama lon lahashbis cheskasam, ki ma'yesh lachash levadla. Why would we totally undo the chazaka? In other words, if you would have said that the chazaka was allowing them to do something further, for example, we're ma'ala them, we raised them up for yuchsin to be considered kohanim or something like that, so then we could understand gedola chazaka. But if again they're just keeping the exact same chazaka they had, what does it mean gedola chazaka? And so to that the Gemara answers, Meikara achol betruma derabanan. There is actually an advantage here, because originally, before this happened, they were only eating truma midrabanan. Hashta achol betruma doraisa. Now what we were saying was the chazaka that they had is so strong that as they're returning to Eretz Yisrael, they can even have truma doraisa. Rashi says, betruma derabanan shari begola, because in the exile, hayu, that's where they were, she'ein sham truma minator. There was no truma midoraisa there in the Golus. The whole mitzvah shituluya ba'aretz ain't a noheges ela ba'aretz, because the real mitzvah on a doraisa level, it only applied in Eretz Yisrael. Kedamin and b'kiddushin, like it says in Kiddushin, and so therefore that's the idea of gedola chazaka. And the Gemara continues, V'bayisem, if you want, I could say another answer. Hashta nami b'truma derabanan achol b'truma doraisa lo. Maybe really, it was saying before only truma derabanan they were allowed to eat. They were not allowed to have truma doraisa. As Rashi over here says, b'truma derabanan achol trumas peiros ilan v'yerek. Maybe they were only allowed to have the truma of the fruits of the trees and the vegetables, which is derabanan. But doraisa, meaning dagon, tirosh, v'yitzor, let's say by grains, by wine, etc. Lo achol, maybe they weren't allowed to have that. And so therefore, again, it's only truma derabanan. And according to this answer, we can say that it's for this reason, lo kasha l'mandamar malin mitruma liyuchsin. Again, the Gemara was discussing the issue of that there's a mandamar that says that from truma you can raise someone up. If you see that they're eating truma, you can assume that they're a kohen even for yuchsin. It's not a kasha. Because maybe we only raise up to yuchsin by truma doraisa. According to this answer, they were only allowed to eat truma derabanan. So there's no question we wouldn't make them kohanim in terms of yuchsin based on truma derabanan. That's what the Gemara means. If you want, I could say hashta nami b'truma derabanan achol b'truma doraisa lo achol. Even now, when they're coming up from the Golus, Rabbi Yossi means to say they're only eating truma derabanan and not truma doraisa. And when do we raise a kohen up? When we see that they have truma, that we raise them up to be a kohen even for yuchsin, even for the lineage. B'truma doraisa, that's only by truma doraisa. B'truma derabanan lo maskinon. But if all we see is that they're eating truma derabanan, that's not going to be enough. And the Gemara continues again with the same question as before, V'yalamai gedola chazaka. But again, according to that, if they're only eating truma derabanan, what's so great about the chazaka? It's the same thing they were doing all along. There's no increase. And so the Gemara answers, no, da'afagav de'ikol migzar mishum truma doraisa. Even though you might have thought to make a gezerah, because if we're going to let them have truma derabanan, maybe they're going to come to eat truma doraisa. As Rashi says, sharei la'aretz bo, because now they're coming into Eretz Yisrael. Umitsuya sham truma gemura doraisa. There's plenty of truma doraisa in Eretz Yisrael. So mashallah yamatzi lahem begola. That wasn't true in the exile. There wasn't truma doraisa around there. V'yesh lachash penyachilim ba. So you might think that we have a gezerah. We should make a gezerah over here, that they might end up eating the truma doraisa. So even though you might have thought to make that gezerah, de'afagav de'ikol migzar mishum truma doraisa lo gazrinan. Even though you might have thought to make a gezerah that they might come to accidentally eat truma doraisa, that we don't make such a gezerah. And the Gemara continues 1 second. To truma doraisa lo achol. Is that really true that they did not eat truma doraisa? But the pasuk says, "Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadoshim hu de lo achol." It says the language is kodesh hakadoshim that they did not eat from. Habit truma doraisa achol. It sounds like they're eating truma doraisa. They're just not eating from the hektish, from the karbanos. And so the Gemara says, no, you can understand the pasuk as follows. Again, that pasuk was a pasuk in Ezra, but you can understand that pasuk as follows. Hachikam, here's what the pasuk in Ezra means when it says, Asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakadoshim lo b'midi de'ikri kodesh. They don't eat anything that's called kodesh. Tichsiv, like the pasuk says, v'chol zor lo yochal kodesh. Number 1, it says, v'chol zor lo yochal kodesh. That's a reference to truma. So you see that truma is called kodesh, so they do not eat truma. V'lo b'midi de'ikri kachim, and also they don't eat anything that's called kachim. Like like the pasuk says, Uvas Kohen kisiya l'ishzar he betrumas hakadoshim lo sochel. It says that the bas Kohen, let's say she marries a non-Kohen, she's not allowed to have trumas hakadoshim, and trumas hakadoshim over there is talking about things like chaz of shok from carbon shlamim, which the Kohanim usually eat. So that again, this lady is not supposed to eat, so they don't have that as well. So it means to say they don't get to eat truma as well. Rashi over here says, Lo b'midi dikri kodesh, not things that are called kodesh, v'hainu truma, that refers to truma. V'chol zor lo yochal kodesh, you see that in the pasuk. The pasuk says, V'chol zor lo yochal kodesh, but truma mishtoi. That pasuk is talking about truma. Techsiv v'parsha le'el mino, v'hashemesh v'tar, v'achar yochal min hakadoshim, v'ukminan b'truma, b'yavamas by all. That pasuk over there by Ubo Hashemesh, it's talking specifically about truma, according to the Gemara in Yavamas. V'lo b'midi dikri kodshim, what's called kodshim? Afilu chaz v'shok, like we said, even the chaz and the shok shel shlamim, of the carbon shlamim, hanecholim l'neshei Kohanim ulavdeim, usually the wives of Kohanim can have that, but over here you have the Bas Kohen marrying a non-Kohen, she cannot have that. The Omar Mar, and the master said that pasuk of Uvas Kohen, B'Yavamas B'Perek Yesh Mutaros B'Vas Kohen Shenisis LiYisrael V'Nasas Almona. The case over there is a Bas Kohen marries Yisrael, she becomes a widow, a grusher, she divorces. V'Zera Ein she doesn't have any children. Shechozeres L'Trumas Avia. The point of the pasuk is that woman, she's a Bas Kohen, now she's leaving the marriage, she returns to be able to eat truma from her father's household. V'Eina Chozeres L'Chazav V'Shok, but she's not allowed to eat Chazav V'Shok. That's what the whole pasuk is talking about. V'Yolef La Mehai Kratz. Learn from this pasuk. That's what it means to say. Again, betrumas hakadoshim lo sochal v'yamar mar, and the master said on that pasuk, bemuram min hakadoshim lo tachal. The pasuk means to say that which is taken from the karbanos, the chaz v'shok, she's not allowed to have, even though she's really returning to her father's house for truma. She's not allowed to have that, so that's called kodshim, and that's the whole point. Is again, these particular kohanim who were returning from the exile, it turns out they were not allowed to have truma doraisa. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof. Again, the issue is, are we allowed to use these things like eating truma, etc., as evidence that an individual is a kohen? So it says over here in the Braisa, Chazaka lekahuna, one way to testify about a person, to have a presumption that that person is a kohen, Nesias kapayim bebavel. So number one, in Bavel, let's say they're duchening. If they're doing Nesias kapayim, that's evidence they're a kohen. Ve'achilas chala beSuria, or if you see in Surya that they're eating chala, that's also going to be evidence. Ve'chilak matanos bekrachin, or also, let's say there's a distribution of the matnas kahuna to them in the cities, that's also evidence that they're a kohen. And the Gemara says, Katani miha, so nevertheless, what does it say over here in this brayso? It says, Nesias kapayim. It says that Nesias kapayim is evidence that a person is a kohen, and that was exactly the question on the previous Amud. Is Nesias kapayim, are we maleh from Nesias kapayim to yuchsin or not? My lav, doesn't it mean liyuchsin? It means we take Nesias kapayim as evidence for yichus purposes that the person is a kohen. And the Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean that. It means l'truma. It means that Nesias kapayim is evidence the person is a kohen, and they can now eat truma. But the Gemara says, "V'hadumya da'achilas chala katani." But 1 second, shouldn't it be similar to achilas chala? The eating of chala is also evidence that you're a kohen. Ma'achilas chala liyuchsin, just like the Brisa was saying that if they're eating chala, it's evidence in terms of yichus. Af nesias kapayim liyuchsin. So doesn't that mean that nesias kapayim is also evidence in terms of yichus? And the Gemara says, no, achilas chala gufa l'truma. Even the eating of chala is evidence. It's evidence enough that now they can eat truma. Now, why would that make any sense? Chala and truma seems to be the same thing. What do you mean the chala is evidence to eat truma? Of course, if they can eat chala, they can eat truma. And the Gemara says, no, it doesn't make sense because this brisa holds chala bisman hazeh derabanan. The chala nowadays is derabanan. We're going to talk about this issue on the bottom of the Amud. Utruma doraisa, and truma nowadays is doraisa. Umaskinan michala derabanan l'truma doraisa, and therefore that's what the brisa is saying. You have a kohen that's eating chala derabanan, it can serve as evidence, and then they can even eat truma doraisa. Uchida'apich luhu Rav Huna Breid Rav Yoshua Rabbanan. This is the way Rav Huna Breid Rav Yoshua reversed it to the Rabbanan. We'll see that in a moment in terms of whether or not chala is derabanan or chala is doraisa. And Rashi over here says, Nesias kapayim bebavel. Again, it said that it's a chazaka if you do Nesias kapayim in Bavel. And Rashi explains, Haraweyu no say kapav bebavel. Let's say we see a person is doing Nesias kapayim in Bavel. Made all of bechol makam shu kohen. We can now testify about that person anywhere that he's a kohen. Umekavlen heimenu, and we accept such testimony. Lefishiyesham yeshiva ubezin kavua bod ken achar no say kapayim. Because in Bavel they had a set bezin that would investigate and make sure that those who are doing Nesias kapayim are in fact kohanim. However, let's say in Bavel you see that the person's eating chala or truma, that would not be a sufficient chazak in Bavel. The chutzlar is lav doraisa truma delay, because truma is not doraisa in chutzlars. So people weren't so strict to make sure that that person eating truma is really a kohen. Then the Brisa said, if you see the person eating challah in Surya, that is evidence. He Aram Tsova Shekivsha David. Surya is the same area called Aram Tsova that was captured by David. V'chibra Eretz Yisrael, and it became attached to Eretz Yisrael. Because Savar Haitana, and this Tana of this Brisa holds Kivush Yochid Shmei Kivush, that if it was conquered by an individual, that's the idea, it was conquered by David, that is still called being a conquered area, and it has the full status of Eretz Yisrael. V'chalsu Trumasa Doraisa, and therefore the challah there and the truma is Doraisa. Because Tana challah v'adin l'truma. Right now we think challah and truma are identical. If they're having challah, they're having truma, it's all the same. Again, we're going to make a distinction. In the answer of the Gemara, we're going to say, no, this particular Tana holds challah is d'Rabbanan and truma is d'Oraisa. V'chiluk matanas ta'azroa v'l'chayayim, and also let's say you see that the person is given zroa and l'chayayim, these are the matanas kahuna, bekrachin in the cities. The avagav d'isurin ain't isur l'zarim. Now, Rashi points out, it's not also for these things to be eaten to non-Kohanim, so what kind of evidence is that? But since the krachim are an area of a large marketplace, and there are a lot of travelers, they recognize the guy, so therefore if he wasn't a Kohen, he would not have such chutzpah to take that in the krachin, and therefore that also serves as evidence. Then the Gemara said, lo no l'truma. Really what we mean to say is that this is evidence, Nesias Kapayim is only evidence for truma. If you see the person doing Nesias Kapayim or challah, Gemara again is at the end going to say challah also, davka b'Surya, specifically in Surya, that's Nesias Kapayim in Bavel and challah in Surya. V'heyid olah b'Eretz Yisrael, and they testify about him in Eretz Yisrael, mekabla neduso lachilo truma. That's enough to give him truma, avalo liyuchsin, but it's not enough for yichus. Ma'achilas challah edus cheskasa liyuchsin. The Gemara initially thinks that challah is for yuchsin. De'ila truma pshitahi, because when it comes to truma, that's obvious. He guva truma, challah itself is the same as truma. Aren't they identical? Isn't challah and truma identical? And the Gemara then says, no, they're not identical according to this Tana. And so we say, no, it's challah d'Rabbanan. Now, if he wasn't a Kohen, we wouldn't give him that challah, because it's a gezerah that you'll give him truma. But again, you go from challah d'Rabbanan up, and that says that's enough evidence that he can have truma d'oraisa. Again, we're going to say later on, we're going to have these opinions by challah, whether challah is d'Rabbanan or whether challah is a d'oraisa. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof, and this is from a Tosefta, Chazaka l'kahuna, a way of making a presumptive status that a person is a Kohen, what serves as evidence, Nesias Kapayim v'chilak granos be'eretz Yisrael. Either if you see the person doing Nesias Kapayim, or from the granary they distribute to him Truma in Eretz Yisrael, that's going to be evidence that the person is a Kohen. Uvesuria, but in Syria, uv'chol makom sheshluchei Rosh Chodesh magian, or in any place where the messengers from Rosh Chodesh, where they reach, they used to send out messengers to tell people when it was Rosh Chodesh. So any of those areas, Nesias Kapayim Raya, so in those areas, if the person is doing Nesias Kapayim, that is evidence the person is a Kohen. Avalo chilak kronos, but the distribution of the Truma to that person is not going to be evidence. Ubavel Kesuria, and the Tosefta notes that Bavel has the same status as Surya. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af Alexandria shall Mitzrayim, so too Alexandria in Egypt, Borishon in the beginning, Memnesha Bezin Kivu and Sham, because there used to be courts over there, so that also would have this status like Bavel and like Surya. And the Gemara continues, Katani Mihas, nevertheless, what does it say in this Tosefta? Nesias Kapayim. Again, it says Nesias Kapayim was considered a Chazaka l'kahuna. My lav, is it not liyuchsan? It means to say we go from Nesias Kapayim, and that's evidence in terms of yichus that the person is a Kohen. And the Gemara says, Lo no l'chala, it just means from Nesias Kapayim, this person can now have chala. But the Gemara says, does that make sense? Shouldn't it be similar to the fact that the guy gets truma? Very similar to the previous proof of the Gemara. The Gemara is assuming that truma and chala are identical. And just like chilak granos, it has to be that we're raising him up for yichus purposes. Af nesias kapayim liyuchsin doesn't mean nesias kapayim also is for yichus. And the Gemara says, lo no, chilak granos gufa l'chala. The truma is actually in order to raise him up for chala. And the Gemara explains, kasavar truma bizman hazeh d'Rabbanan. This Tosefta holds the exact opposite of what we said before. It holds that truma nowadays is d'Rabbanan. V'chala d'oraisa, and chala nowadays is d'oraisa. Umaskina mi truma d'Rabbanan l'chala d'oraisa. And that's the chiddush of the Tosefta. We can raise a person up from truma d'Rabbanan to chala d'oraisa. Uchedash kechinu Rav Huna b'rei d'Rav Yoshua l'Rabbanan. As Rav Huna b'rei d'Rav Yoshua, as he found for the Rabban, as he found from the Rabbanan, and the Gemara now explains that. D'Amar Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua, because Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said as follows: Ashkechasinu l'Rabbanan b'vei Rav. I found the scholars of the yeshiva, the Yasviva Kamri, that they were sitting and they were saying the following: Afil l'Mandamar Truma b'Zman Hazeh d'Rabbanan. Even according to the one who says that Truma nowadays is d'Rabbanan, Chala d'Oraisa. Chala is d'Oraisa. That was one opinion that we saw, that Truma is d'Rabbanan nowadays and Chala is d'Oraisa. Why the distinction? Sharei Zayin shekivshu v'Zayin shechilku, because in the 7 years that they were conquering Eretz Yisrael, in the 7 years they were dividing up Eretz Yisrael, nischayvu b'Chala, they were in fact chayiv in Chala, v'lo nischayvu b'Truma, but they were not chayiv in Truma. So our period of time now, b'Zman Hazeh, also is similar to that. There's a chiyuv d'Oraisa in Chala, but not in Truma. And I said back to them, this is how he reversed it to them. The Gemara mentioned earlier that it was reversed. I said back to them, and I said back to them, Adrab, on the contrary. Even according to the one who nowadays, even according to the Mando Amr who says nowadays Truma is Doraisa, Chala D'Rabbanan, Chala is still D'Rabbanan. And how do we know that? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Bevoachem El Haaretz, it says when you come to the land, that's when you're Chayiv and Chala. Bevoachem, now if you're going to take Bevoachem literally, I might think even when 2 or 3 spies come into the land, there's a chiyuv of chala. Tam and lomar bivoachem. The pasuk says bivoachem, and that means bebias kulchem. When you all come into the land, that's the chiyuv of chala. Bebias kulchem amarti velo bebias meksaschem. When you all come into the land, and not when you only partially come into the land. And that's why nowadays also the idea is you don't have bias kulchem, and there's no chiyuv doraisa in terms of chala. V'chiaskinu Ezra, and when Ezra came up, and we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Nesias kapayim v'chiluk ranos, the truma. Again, if they give out truma or by Nesias Kapayim be'eretz Yisrael. Again, the Tosefta said these are specifically proofs in Eretz Yisrael. No se Kapayim diga bezin kavun ubadki. Again, Nesias Kapayim, you need to have a bezdin there who inspects. V'chiluk ranos kasal kalei dechashta de truma b'zman hazeh doraisa. Again, initially the Gemara thinks truma is doraisa. V'keven da'avon misa ika maskinan minol liyuchsin, and the Gemara thinks that we're going from truma to yuchsin because it's doraisa. The Gemara will change that and say it's from truma to chala because truma is d'Rabbanan. Besurya v'chol makom sheshluchei Eretz Yisrael magian. And then the Tosefta said when it comes to Surya, and when it comes to areas where the shluchim come to reach to tell them about Rosh Chodesh, Lohodia Lagoli Yom Shekitshu Bezin As HaChodesh, they used to send out messengers to the exile telling them when Rosh Chodesh was, Lasos Pesach Bizmano, so they would know to make Pesach in the proper time. Dahainu HaYoshvim Besoch Mahal Chamisha Asar Yom. Those were all the areas that were 15 days, within 15 days travel from Eretz Yisrael. Nesias Kapayim Raya, Lefisha Bezin Kavu Hashem Shemekabel Shlichus HaChodesh Shal Bezin HaGodol. So Nesias Kapayim is a proof in those areas because he had a Bezin over there. But when it comes to the distribution of truma, that is not a raya. The truma did to lav doraisa, because the Tosefta holds truma is not doraisa in these areas. Over Surya nami haitana savar kivush yachid lo shmei kivush. Even in Surya, this Tana holds it's not doraisa because the kivush yachid, that individual kivush, is not considered kivush. Bevei Rav, again he found them beis hamedrish. Kari bei Rav, he found them in the beis medrash. That's called bei Rav. Nischayvu bechala. So then again they are chayiv in chala. This was a machlokus whether chala is doraisa rabbanan. Again, it says Bevoachem el Haaretz by Chala. V'tanya b'Sifri Rabbi Yishmael Mershina HaKosav B'Yazumi Kol Bir Shebatorah. So here it uses that different language of Bevoachem. It doesn't say Kisavo. Shebechula Nemar Kisavo Ki Yeviacha. All the other times it says Savo Yeviacha. V'chan Bevoachem L'Lamedcha Shekevan Shenichnu Solan Eschayv. The first opinion says the moment they enter, they're chayiv. Chala is actually a doraisa, even if Trumas d'Rabbanan. V'lo Neschayv b'Trumas u'Maisrus, and they're not chayiv in Trumas and Maisrus. D'chsiv degonchot v'azaracha hamiyuchedes lach. It has to be that it's your land, that you're conquering it, you've distributed the land already. V'yot tola hakasav hamaiser b'minyan shnos hashmita. Furthermore, when it comes to Maiser, that's dependent on the years of Shemitah. D'chsiv b'ashana hashlishis shnas hamaser u'shmitos lo manu el mishakivshu v'chilko. Again, Shemitah only started after the conquering and the distribution of the land. Kedamrina b'Seder Olam and Mesechet Erchen. That's what we say in Seder Olam and Mesechet Erchen. So that was the first Tana. The first Tana held that Chala was doraisa right away, but not Truma and Maiser. And then the other opinion was the opposite. It's got to be everybody comes into Eretz Yisrael for Chala. According to the second opinion, since it says Bevoachem, a different kind of language, below Kasav, Kisavo, it doesn't say Kisavo. I might think even when just the spies go in, Talmud Lomar, again, the pasuk says Bevoachem, and it means to say Bias Kulchem. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 25a Amud Beis.